One very important tip in growing cool season vegetables is that you try to remember to do some thinning. And in one of our cold frames here, we've got some lettuce and spinach planted that was just broadcast in there, and it's way too thick. And we're right at the stage that it's easy to start our initial thinning. And one easy way is to use a garden rake, and we'll start with the lettuce here, and you just pull it through, and you can actually do it several different ways. Pull it through a few times and you'll thin out part of it. Now obviously this is still so thick that it's not going to thin it all the way. A leaf rake would be another good tool, and we'll have to come back and do it again and probably still thin some by hand. And then we'll do the same thing with our spinach and just thin out a little bit of that initially right when it starts putting on its true leaves. Now another crop that's probably not a real favorite of many gardeners but is grown is beets. Now one of the problems with beets is that they get too thick initially too, and they need to be thinned out as well. And one of the reasons for that is because of the seed. And let me show you some seed here, and I'll sprinkle a few in my hand. What looks to be one seed is really a cluster of seeds, and they're kind of a corky texture. And if you tried to pull those or break them apart, you would actually damage it. So it's best to just go ahead and plant them about 2 inches apart. But if you've ever noticed, you may plant a seed 2 inches apart and still get a cluster right in that area. And again, that's because most of the varieties are a cluster of seeds versus just one seed, even though it looks like that. Now, when you're dealing with beets, obviously there's all kinds of varieties. There's some for canning, some that are grown just for the foliage, different sizes of shapes and everything. Some people like them crowded if you're going to can them because that helps control the size. But if you want them to size up for you, again, you're going to need to go in and pull them and do some thinning. Now one interesting variety that's starting to show up in the market last year and this year is called mobile, and really the term you need to be familiar with is monogerm. Now when you look at the seed in your hand, they really look the same. It still looks like a cluster, but it's been bred to be a monogerm, meaning that it's just going to have one plant or one seed that's viable in that cluster. So we've tried a little experiment here. We just planted them in about 4 to 10 days. Hopefully we'll see some comparisons where we won't have to do as much thinning, and that's one of the pluses of these new varieties that are considered monogerm. Again, you don't have to do as much thinning. Now, another thing that the monogerms supposedly are a little bit more of a, or less of a problem, is when you have your beets, a lot of times you'll cut them open and you'll see, instead of a dark red color like we have here, you'll see white cloudy tissue or rings, and this one's pretty good shape. And that is caused from some of the unsettled temperatures that we might have this time of year. For example, we may have a lot of rain, then followed by some dry spells or heat, and then cold spells, and just those uneven temperatures will cause some cloudiness or white rings. And again, it doesn't really affect the fruit. It may affect it to be a little bit bitter, but it's still safe to eat. And the monogerm varieties are supposedly a little bit more tolerant to those uneven temperature conditions. So when you're growing or buying your beet seeds this year, you might read some of the details, and you know, that's what the garden catalogs are a lot of fun, just to find out the details, and we'll keep you up to date on how these varieties do.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.